In 1206, Kutabuddin Aibak found himself commanding a few thousand horsemen in the middle of a subcontinent of millions. Winning the territory was a matter of cavalry charges, but holding it was a matter of distance. The further his soldiers marched from Delhi, the thinner his control became. His successor, Iltutmish, recognized that the Sultanate couldn't be ruled as a permanent military occupation. He began building a bureaucratic structure designed to survive even when the Sultan's army wasn't physically present. This took the form of the Iqta, a method of governance that decentralized the burden of ruling. The Sultanate divided the land into administrative blocks, handing them to military commanders for local security and tax collection. They paid their troops, kept a portion, and sent the surplus revenue back to Delhi's treasury. To tie these isolated regions into a single economic unit, Iltutmish introduced two standard coins, the silver tunka and the copper jital. This ensured that a tax collector in Punjab and a merchant in Bengal were finally speaking the same financial language. However, this delegated power created a second center of gravity. A council of 40 powerful Turkish nobles, known as the Chalisa, began to see the Sultan as someone they could influence or replace if the flow of land and wealth didn't favor them. By the time Balban took the throne, the Sultanate was essentially a hostage to its own administrators. He responded by deploying a network of secret internal spies and making public examples of rebellious governors, attempting to shock the nobility back into submission. The Iqta system saved the Sultanate from collapsing in its first decades, but it set the stage for a 300-year tug-of-war between the throne in Delhi and the men who actually controlled the land. Alauddin Khalji eventually decided that the only way to secure the throne was to strip the nobility of their leverage. He confiscated thousands of private estates and religious endowments, bringing the empire's most fertile lands under direct state management. This allowed him to dismantle the private armies of the nobles. Instead of relying on governors to provide troops, Alauddin recruited a massive standing army and paid them directly in cash from the central treasury. But a professional army paid in silver was a massive drain on the state. To keep his soldiers from demanding higher wages, the Sultan had to ensure that the cost of basic goods stayed low across the entire capital. He established the Diwan-e-Riyasat, a department that regulated the price of grain, cloth, and livestock. No matter the harvest or the demand, every merchant was bound to a strictly enforced price ceiling. Compliance was monitored by inspectors called Shahana-e-Mandi. If a merchant was caught using false weights to cheat a customer, the law was literal. A quantity of flesh equal to the weight of the missing goods was cut directly from the merchant's body. Through this combination of direct central pay and market manipulation, Alauddin converted the Sultanate into a concentrated military state, capable of funding defenses against the repeated Mongol invasions of the 1300s. The Tughlaq dynasty inherited this centralized machine and attempted to push it even further. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, a scholar of philosophy and logic, launched a series of ambitious experiments to tighten the empire's administration. He attempted to move the capital from Delhi to the more central Dalatabad, forcing the city's population to march 700 miles south. The move was intended to secure the Deccan Peninsula, but the logistical strain and loss of life nearly broke the empire's morale. Faced with a global silver shortage and an empty treasury, he introduced a copper token currency, decreeing it was worth the same as silver. It was a concept centuries ahead of its time, but it ignored the reality of medieval forging. Without any way to verify the coins, thousands of citizens forged their own copper currency in their homes. Inflation skyrocketed, trade stopped, and the Sultan was eventually forced to pay out his remaining silver just to buy back the worthless copper he had issued. To stabilize the empire, his successor, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, moved in the opposite direction. He made administrative and military positions hereditary, allowing nobles to pass their lands and titles down to their sons. This bought the loyalty of the elite, but it effectively turned the Sultanate back into a collection of private family estates. The central government's ability to demand performance or merit from its officials vanished. By the 15th century, the Lodi dynasty took control, but they faced a different political reality. Coming from an Afghan tribal background, their power depended on a coalition of chieftains who viewed the Sultan as a first among equals, a leader who ruled by consensus rather than divine decree. Sikandar Lodi attempted to reassert the throne's dominance by moving the capital to Agra and introducing a new standardized land measurement, the Sikandari Gaz. He wanted to audit the income of his nobles to ensure the state was getting its full share. But the final sultan, Ibrahim Lodi, lacked his father's tact. He demanded the absolute subservient loyalty of the old Turkic sultans, without having the standing army or the financial control to back it up. He began arresting and humiliating senior Afghan commanders, treating his coalition of tribal leaders like common subjects. He destroyed the fundamental partnership that allowed the Lodi state to function. Seeing the Sultan as a threat to their own survival, his own governors turned to the north. They sent word to Babur, a Timurid prince in Kabul, essentially inviting a foreign invasion to solve an internal dispute. When the two forces met at Panipat in 1526, Ibrahim brought the traditional might of the Sultanate, elephants and cavalry. Babur brought matchlocks and cannons. The Sultanate was destroyed in a single afternoon, but its internal structure remained. The Mughals didn't build a new India from scratch. They simply took the Sultanate's existing maps of land grants, the tax codes, and the currency, and used them to build the most powerful empire in Indian history.